About time. Okay. I feel like it takes a lifetime, bro. Okay. All right, let's just get it started.
Jennings,
Yeah.
I'm concerned that Jazz isn't trans. Because
That's not for us to say.
I didn't say. I said I'm concerned that Jazz is not trans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the
Just how quickly you just come in and be like, yeah, well, that's not for us to say. Like, come on, bro.
reason is Jazz is dating women now, right? So then Jazz
What
would
does that have to do with being trans?
well, Jazz would then be a biological male dating women at the age of 23.
What does that have to do with being trans?
So it has to do with whether or not Jazz made the decision for themselves or the parent made it when they were 3 years old. So the question is, we want to avoid a John Money type situation, right? Where you had these two kids and the doctor told one of the young boys he was actually a girl and then forced him to live as a girl, ultimately resulting in his suicide. And then
Which is just a sad story. So sad. Super sad story. And just like the prospect of thinking that parents are doing this to their children for some kind of clout is just egregious in 110 different ways.
death of the brother as well. We don't want that to happen. And so that did happen already, and we know that happened. So we have to be careful about taking a 3-year-old and then raising them and telling them they're female, because then if they start exhibiting traditional, gender behaviors, there may be some concern. For instance, Jazz stopped dilating. And that was the big controversy over the past few weeks, the mother going on TV saying she would force Jazz to do it. If Jazz is saying, I'm not gonna, and the mother saying, do it.
Okay, take that back a little bit. Just his face.
Things is sterile, right?
I don't know much about Jazz Jennings.
Jazz Jennings going on TV saying she would force Jazz to do it. If Jazz
Look at the face, bro. Like, look at this face. You have to be, there has to be no brain cells in that thing, man.
saying, I'm not gonna, and the mother saying, do it or I'll wring your neck, which is a quote. And then Jazz is now dating women. We're starting to see a pattern that may be concerning because it follows the John Money situation. Whether or not Jazz is trans or not, my concern is, what if? And that means there may be children who are going to be pushed down a path that ultimately leads to their suicide because their parents can't make the decision for them, but they did.
So the data overwhelmingly shows that if you give children gender-affirming care, especially if you have loving and accepting parents who accept children.
This is what's insane. You can have conflicting, there are literally conflicting studies all over. And you get this brother going, you know what? It's overwhelmingly in support of that. Like, bro, what? How are you going to have a whole hour and 30-minute discussion? And then the next thing you know about how this is completely disputed on all this. And then you're going to go on and say, well, it's overwhelmingly, like, dude, not good faith. Not good faith
Children's
whatsoever.
actual gender identity, it reduces the rate.
Also, by the way, welcome in everybody. If you've not been here before, I appreciate it very much. Just going to be doing this live reacting to the end of this clip because I did not finish it.
Of suicide dramatically. In the case of a parent who affirms their child's gender, it can reduce suicide rates of up to 93% in some studies. It's not a case of more often than not, these are children who are approaching their parents saying they think this is something happening to them, and parents pushing back and being like, no, this is wrong. You're just a tomboy. Oh, this is not you. This is not.
But wouldn't you expect that? Like, as a parent, like, is that not the whole purpose of, like, you guiding your children? And, like, you being a father being like, hey, this is your daughter. And then your daughter starts doing these things. You would go like, hey, like, that's not what my daughter's supposed to be doing. And then acting as if, like, there's just, like, this egregious war from parents on children that, like, prevents them from, it's not good faith all around, dude. The way that both of these narratives get painted from either side, however far you want to put it, is just like, dude, that's not what's going on. You're lying, or you are so ignorant to the fact because you're buried in an echo chamber. So whatever.
Blah, blah. And you don't go into a doctor and all of a sudden they're like, here's Lupron.
They do.
No, but they don't, Tim. The average amount of time, the average amount of time.
You can't say they don't.
I also love them arguing, though.
When we've had the anecdotes, they do. Call it an anecdote.
It's an
I'm
anecdote.
telling you, it does happen.
Of course, but that's an anecdote. We have to look at
So
data,
don't say
science,
it doesn't
statistics.
happen.
Well,
Isn't it the classic thing? Like, deny, then admit. Like, deny that it's happening, but then finally admit that it's happening, the leftists. and then deflect what's happening. It's crazy.
Happens, but that doesn't mean it's
Then
a
say
broad
should
trend.
not happened.
Right, but that's okay. This is asinine. We have to talk about what actually occurs via the number.
No, Jazz isn't a kid anymore. I'm pretty sure 18. If she's not 18, she's 16, so she's still a minor. But I believe she's 18. I can check that out real quick.
Right? That's what matters. Like I have here the largest U.S. transgender survey ever done. It's in 2015 to 21,598 participants. And this covers people in childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. And it has all the results you're looking for.
So let me ask you a question. Why do you think we're seeing the increase,
No, she's 22. She's 22 years old.
a rapid increase in the past few years?
I can explain that as well.
Of young people identifying as trans.
Okay, can I answer that?
Can you
afterwards?
read the study,
Yeah,
please?
of course. So it shows the 2015 U.S. transgender survey of 21,598 participants that with hormone therapy, psychological distress for children reduces by 222%, late adolescence 153%, adulthood 81%, suicidal ideation for children goes down 135%, for adolescents 62%, and for adults 21%. That is dramatic.
Is this the
is stunning.
Stanford Medical School survey analysis done by Jack Turbin?
I don't know the person
Okay.
who did it. Let me
Okay.
pull it up. But in terms of the increase, Tim, of people,
Because there was a study done by Stanford Medical School that very closely fits the description of what you've just read out there, which is very ascientific and with
Well,
data that is collected poorly.
I love Seamus. I also find myself much more aligning, I think, politically in the way I would carry myself in these kind of debates, or the way I would kind of actually hold a perspective on things. I fall a lot more aligned with Seamus. Now, I am myself not Catholic, but I think I hold the metal edge of the sword like he does.
Yeah, so just please find
You
the
can
source of
say-
that, because I want to pull that apart,
yeah,
but I
of
want to
course,
be
sure.
sure that I know you're talking about that
Yeah.
study.
I'm curious as to why you think it's increasing so much.
What's that? What's that
The history of left-handedness
signify?
says rate of left-handedness among Americans by year of birth. And then so it's interesting. So he's trying to, I'm imagining he's going to try to make a comparison argument to the fact that there was a large increase of left-handed people. Probably the percentage-based matrix with is the social contagion argument for transgenderism, you know, being under like 10% of the population, even way less below that. And then jumping up to, I think it's like in the 20s to 20 to 30% range as it is now, because he's going to try to like downplay the fact that it's like social contagion and like these things happen. And then you're going to compare left-handedness to transgender ideology. It's like, okay, I guess let's see the argument.
The history of left-handedness.
this is the history of left-handedness in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what happens here?
It levels out. It goes up
Jumps
and levels
in
out.
levels.
We used to treat people who were left-handed as satanic, as the devil, all that kind of shit. You remember that, right? And that's why there was a lot of people who didn't record themselves as being left-handed. And then boom, when we stopped
Told you that's exactly what he was going to do, is try to make that comparison.
doing that after the 1880s and in the 1900s, it spiked. Now, this spike isn't because there was a whole bunch of indoctrination, or Alex Jones was like, oh, left-handed ideology, everyone has become left-handed. This has nothing to do with that. This is naturally how many left-handed people there were, and then it plateaued. We are in a situation right now where it is safer than ever for people to come out, and if they're queer, bisexual, whatever it is, and because of that, they feel safer expressing that. That's why Gen Z of all
I was concerned there was a
generations-
transgenocide.
Yeah, so here's
This is the actual statistics on people increasing. You can see the red one.
Mm-hmm.
That is Gen Z. That is the amount of people who in Gen Z, it's skyrocketing. It looks
So
like
He wouldn't hold it still. 5.6% of U.S. adults identify as LGBT. Can't really see much on there.
they're identifying more than ever.
You
Because
see TIMCAST
their
there, the
generation
camera.
feels more comfortable talking about this kind of stuff.
So you don't
more
think that
media
there's like
about
a transgenocide or anything like that?
I don't think that there's a trans indoctrination that is coming through media. that is-
Genocide, I said it.
Yes, and I'm saying that I don't think there's a trans indoctrination coming through media that is programming kids to become trans. I think that's ridiculous. So, and if you want to change topics to talk about trans genocide, we can move on to that. But
is it- is
you
it-
asked me specifically why
Right,
is there a spike?
Yeah.
That is why.
Okay, so my follow-up is, you think trans people feel safer than ever?
No. Right now, there's over 400 different bills being pushed in the United States that is directly targeting trans people.
So they don't feel safe.
Of course they don't.
So then why are they coming out if they don't feel safe?
They have more access because that generation, Generation Z, has a lot more acceptance towards trans people than older people who pass laws, draconian people who pass laws. The boomers are the ones running the show right now. They're still the ones in government. They're still the ones passing laws. There's very few Generation Z in government or parliament.
I mean, I do agree. I agree. Like, boomers and the older generation are not phasing out. I mean, they're aging, but they're not aging out. And so, like, I do agree with overall, like, a lot of what happens in our political discourse at the higher levels is very, very, very heavily weighted in one generation's favor. Now, does that back up his point? I don't really know.
You want to know what I think? I think there is a trans genocide.
Okay.
And I think it's you.
Okay.
Because you're sterilizing a lot of these people.
How so?
I mean, they're literally sterilizing them. The surgery to remove the gonads, hysterectomies, and puberty and cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers have a high rate of sterilization. I mean, first of all, removal of the gonads in the uterus is an absolute sterilization, and then puberty blockers have a very high rate, and cross-sex hormones have an extremely high rate of sterilizing the individual. So
he flipped it on him. So essentially, he was like, saying the transgenocide is literally by trying to convince these people to get rid of their ability to reproduce. I mean, that's a fair point, man. That's a fair. I didn't even really thought about it like that.
These people can no longer reproduce. That's genocide.
Is this the joke you're going to go for?
Joke? You are removing these people's ability to reproduce.
Mm.
And if they're a young age and they haven't had the ability, like for instance, Jazz Jennings can never have kids. Jazz Jennings also, and this is probably part of your studies, can't actually feel any sexual feeling of any kind.
Do you have any idea how weird this sounds right now? Like, why are you obsessing with a stranger's genital pleasure? That's so weird. That's so bizarre.
And it's crazy because they go right back into like, well, why are you so concerned with this? Why are you so? But it's like, brother, you were the one like with 14 different papers trying to convince everyone else that we should be concerned about a stranger's genitalia, and that like we should respect these kind of perverse things that go on. It is just like he is a classic leftoid. He's doing all of the basic things that happen when they get shown like, hey man, you're in a little bit of an echo chamber. You want to kind of like not be insane for a minute. And then it's him like.
Bizarre.
That was very weird yourself.
You guys are all
like,
No.
So I'm talking about adults who engage in activities, which is a large portion of the global economy, whether you like it or not.
Sure.
Sex sells, they say. And when I say this person will never have this ability, you go, how weird is that?
It's weird for you to fixate on a stranger's genital pleasure. That's strange. That's so bizarre.
Well, she's public about it.
But see, you're not making an argument right now, is my point.
I'm not. I'm saying it's weird. It's not an argument.
Yeah,
that's an observation.
So you're trying to make an appeal to emotion and an appeal to shame.
I'm just giving you my genuine thought when you say something like that. Like,
well, it was a really fucking pathetic attempt at trying to make an argument.
Why should we talk about that? Why should we discuss?
Yeah, I mean, Tim is clearly angry about it, which I love it, man. I love when Tim gets up in arms because he does usually just kind of make some kind of his voice, the speed of it, just getting increases to like 1.5.
Discuss whether or not she has genital feeling. That's not important. It's not. It's not in my business.
So let's focus then on the sterilizing of the individual. Are you okay with that?
Who's sterilizing people?
Jazz Jennings is sterile.
Why are we going back to Jazz Jennings? I don't know anything
famous.
about her.
Because Jazz is a famous individual on cable television.
So if she is sterile for whatever reason, what does that have to do with me? Why does that concern me? Why should I pass legislation?
The sterilization of teenagers.
This is such a weird way to frame this. Like
you are removing teenagers' ability to have children.
This is such a weird way to frame this, but it's like literally what you are doing. It is the classic example. I hate that I keep saying that, so I apologize. But the right very well understands what the left is proposing and their arguments behind them, and in the analysis of which that might lead to. And the left, never have putting themselves in the opposing arguer's position, has no understanding or no reason the qualms of which the argument he is bringing forth. Classic leftist, dude. He is literally every single thing that the right complains about, he's doing it.
Children.
I'm not doing anything. I'm not a doctor, Tim.
I
don't have the ability to do this.
Right?
I support people having access to health care. Of course. Why would I want to prevent that just because some people have bigotry towards them?
Let's try again. You seem scared of this. Do you believe that parents and doctors should have the ability to remove the ability of a child for future reproduction.
They should have the ability to give them access to healthcare. Of course they should.
So why do you keep saying
you're implying that every single gender-affirming care results in sterilization. That is not true at all.
I said the removal
There's
of
also people who are trans that never get bottom surgery.
You seem very scared of this. It's scaring you.
How am I afraid to?
Because you keep deflecting when I ask you. So Jazz Jennings is a specific example. Let's try this. Let's slow down and go one.
We've helped millions of creators improve
we hate that.
their SEO to grow their YouTube channels. TubeBuddy is a platform that helps you
point at a time,
You
right?
think I'm deflecting because I don't want to keep talking about someone's genital pleasure who's a stranger. I'm saying it shouldn't concern you. It shouldn't concern anyone, Tim.
Your appeal to emotion is not going to work on me. I'm asking you a science.
They're going at it. And no, Tim never cusses 100%, especially not on his main IRL show. He usually saves that for the end. But I think he was seriously getting so upset with just the disingenuous, bad faith argument that this guy is trying to put forward that Tim's like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to slam you all. Let's do it right now.
No, I can appeal to your emotion.
I'm trying a logic-based question about the future of these people. I believe you are genociding them. I believe you intend on genociding autistic individuals. I genuinely believe that.
Who's autistic in this?
A large portion of trans kids are autistic, namely females. So this is an issue in that young, lesbian, autistic females are a large portion of those who are transgender.
Do you have data on this?
I mean, come on, bro. Do you have data on what you've brought up? You couldn't give me one study, but yes,
I've given you not only studies, meta studies. I've given you multiple meta studies on this. I've given you a surplus of information on this topic.
Make up six times more likely to have autism, according to NPR.org. So I think you're trying to genocide autistic people. I literally.
See, okay, I love it now. He's coming up with these arguments to go right at it. So we're going to be emotional, right? That's the whole point of like not engaging in somebody with good faith about the way you want to propose your arguments.
6 times more. What's the percentage of? That's what I asked you.
6 times, 60%.
That's not how that works. That's not. You don't.
600. Sorry.
No, that's not how that works.
You're saying what percent of them?
What percentage of trans people happen to be autistic lesbians? That was your claim that a large portion are. I'm saying I don't know any statistics on that. I've never heard that before.
So the first thing I pulled up was that transgender and non-binary people are up to 6 times more likely to have autism, right?
Right, but that's not answering the question yet.
And your question is what portion of, let me Google it again.
I love this. Yeah, this is amazing.
Because I thought that was sufficient and you know.
Because I will say one of the biggest grievances I do have with the TIMCAST IRL show is a lot of it does seem like an echo chamber because most often they will constantly just re-agree with each other. Barely move the needle on like what there is to talk about. So once you get through like the first 30 minutes of the show, it's like, well, they already dropped all the news points, and now they're just going to sit here and just keep agreeing with each other over and over again for the next hour and a half. I like this. This moves the needle. This brings in opposing audiences to both watch a video on one single platform to see 2 people go right at each other. And I think it's a great ability for those who are inside the audiences of the content creator to decide if they really agree with the arguments that are being made by said content creator.
24%.
So that's not the majority, even if that stat is true.
6 times more common. 24%.
That's still not the majority, even if that statistic was true.
Yeah, no, the majority is.
So 24% of trans people are autistic according to that data, and 6% of.
So what I think is, I think that there are people who hate people with Down syndrome, and in Iceland, they've actually publicly avowed or praised their eradication of.
And that's kind of dark. I can't even imagine being the kind of elitist individual who finds themselves hating people who have less than just because like they can't function correctly. I would find that you just must be an evil individual if you find yourself feeling that way. Also, I agree. A lot of people quit watching Tim because he won't commit to anything. The Eliza Blue story really destroyed a lot of his audience. If you go back and you look at his video count numbers, the next I think 8 streams he had after the whole debacle with Eliza Blue, his video, the watch duration and the view counts just like take a nosedive. He's picked back up because people will, they fall to where objective news lies, and that's why he keeps an audience.
Of people with Down syndrome. I think that's horrifying. Like, You can be okay with it. I'm not saying you're not allowed to believe that, right? You don't have to have the same morals as me. I just think it's wrong to genocide like people with Down syndrome. You know what I mean?
You have completely derailed this conversation. You're assuming that I'm pro people having abortions for people who have Down syndrome. When we're talking about,
I'm not saying you do. I'm saying in Iceland, they've
what
stated
does this have to do with trans rights?
Right. So we see a higher rate of autistic people, autism in trans kids.
You said it makes it the majority. It does not, even based on the source you pulled up. Okay.
24%.
Okay.
I still believe that this is very much an effort. I think the left is intent on genociding trans people.
In what way?
I mean, genociding, I don't know about that, but I think they are trying to make sure the human race has a much, much harder time combating anything down the pipe. If there was to be any kind of fascistic or communistic or, along those lines of what you see in late stage communism tyranny, the kind of things they try to capitulate and force upon the people.
Removing their ability to reproduce.
How are they removing their ability
by
to reproduce?
By cutting off their testicles.
That's what's crazy. How do you not understand that? If this large percentage of people start sterilizing themselves, castrating themselves, mutilating their genitals, then start convincing the generations that come after them that this is an acceptable thing to do and that you should want to do it, well, isn't that speaking for itself? These people are blatantly pulling themselves out of the gene pool, that they're not continuing their family line. I don't know how you could view that any other way without being ignorant to just the logical facts of what happens when people do these things.
And removing their
that is not the only operation that is done. There are trans people who maintain their same genitals as before. Right. Not everyone has to decide to get bottom surgery. That's a choice they should make.
And cross-sex hormones do have a high rate of causing sterilization.
It can, but it doesn't always. Also, and you can be trans and not get any operations at all.
So I think you are... So I'm in favor of making sure these people can always have families and have kids, right? Your position, whether you support the moral issue of or not, results in many of them being sterile. For instance, the reason I use Jazz Jennings as an example, because this is a person on television with millions of followers who wrote a book and told kids about this journey. The journey that Jazz Jennings went on resulted in a complete inability to have a family and have children. I think that's terrifying because Jazz was not old enough to understand the implications of that. Jazz will never have a family. Jazz, the genetics of Jazz Jennings is over. That is one of the most horrifying things to me as a human being, because
I mean, I wouldn't say I agree with that. It's a horrifying prospect that somebody can't reproduce. It's a horrifying prospect to me to think that you would have gotten the consent from a minor at that young age to do this. And the horrifying aspect is thinking that this individual may at one point regret or probably sit there, and you can visualize it with me, them weeping in a dark corner of their bedroom because they will never be able to have children. And maybe that's not even a thought that Jazz Jennings has had, but it doesn't need to be Jazz Jennings. It could be someone else. It could be someone in your community. It could be somebody who's 20 miles away from where I'm at right now. And the thought of that happening to them is extremely depressing and extremely dark.
I think genocide is wrong, right?
Why should her ability to be or have reproductive function, why should that concern you?
For the same reason the Uyghur Muslims in China concern me, like human rights issues. China, for instance,
But what if she never wants to have kids?
That's something you determine for yourself later in life.
Exactly. So why is it our business?
Because it's been removed before Jazz could have the ability to make the conclusion.
That has nothing to do with us. She could decide to never want to have kids, and that's fine and valid.
Right. So my morals would be that a society protects the children, because there's certain things you can't know until you're at least 24 or older when your brain is fully developed, which is why we don't allow people to drink and do certain drugs, whatever drugs are legal, until they're 21. So for me, I'm like, if you can't drink till you're 21, if there's you can't smoke till you're 18, this society absolutely recognizes you can't drive till a certain age. That the reason that the driving age is what it is, one of the arguments made, I think it was in Illinois, is that risk taking is a lot higher in youth than it is in older people. So the argument is once you're past 16, you go through driver's ed. That helps control for the higher risk taking of younger people.
That makes sense.
So we set an age limit. For someone who's 10 years old to be put on Lupron and then cross-sex hormones, they will never develop the ability to reproduce. So in the instance of Jazz, again, a famous individual who's very influential with millions of followers, there was never the ability to reproduce developed, which caused complications. Complications aside, that's Jazz's personal business.
Right, which he's saying, I mean, he's pretty much saying exactly what I said, which is if it happened before, with as young as it happened to Jazz, how could you even conceive that they had a notion to even, or the capacity to even think in the future that they may want a family at some point? Insanity.
But the puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones did sterilize Jazz. 100% sterilization. Jazz was not old enough to understand the implications of that. So I have concerns about having children, whether they choose to or their parents choose to. I think that's genocide.
I can kind of see your argument, because if a kid was a straight kid, just a kid, and they were like a 12-year-old girl, and she was like, I don't want to have babies when I'm older. And the mom was like, okay, then we'll sterilize you right now. And they went and had the kid had a hysterectomy. I think that's illegal. I don't know, but I would imagine society needs to protect little kids from crazy parents that are like, just because a 12-year-old says they don't have babies later in life. So the fact that it is sterilizing as a byproduct, I think should be taken into account with the whole procedure.
I think that's still something that comes down to the individual and what they choose to do. And if someone is like, I want to have gender affirming care, knowing the risks, then why is that my business? It's the same thing with someone who wants to have a surgery that can have.
But that's insanity, dude. If a minor can't consent to having sex, how I don't understand how you can make that leap to being like, a minor can't consent to have sex, but a minor can consent to having gender affirming care. It doesn't make any sense. To me, that's the biggest like bifurcation I have, is like, I can't cross those two because one of them's wrong, right? And to me, it's like, okay, well, I think that you definitely cannot be having gender affirming care in a minor, because how can they consent to that being a decision they want for the rest of their lives when a lot of these things are irreversible? Also, I appreciate you wanting to watch, Adrian. Thank you.
Have other complications, that's not my business. If someone had an appendix inflamed and they had to have their appendix out, there are potential complications that come from that, but I'm not going to prevent them from having healthcare and saying that you can't have a right to get your appendix out, because every major medical association in the United States agrees that that is the best way to treat appendicitis. And in this case, when we're talking about trans people, every single medical association in the United States agrees on gender affirming care.
Then you know what they should do?
Every single one.
You know what they should do? They should produce one single randomized controlled trial for puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to show that it's safe and effective. But they have not. So it's not healthcare, it's experimentation.
Metal. Seamus is so metal. That is the conviction you should have when you are bringing forth your ideas, or when it is specifically relating to his inability to produce a study, this entire debate about any of the points he was bringing up without having to fall back on meta-analysis on previous studies. It's an aggregate for all of these studies in which they throw away all the individual conclusions to write one single conclusion. There you have it. Men, be as metal as Seamus. Be as metal as Seamus.
You talk about giving kids healthcare. That's not healthcare. Healthcare repairs something which is broken. You use the example of somebody's appendix not functioning properly.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, yes. So what you have to do in that instance is intervene so that the body can function as it is intended to. Destroying somebody's ability to procreate is demolishing the organ that you're claiming to treat, right? You're destroying the biological function rather than helping to improve it. That's not healthcare.
I want to pull this up too. This is from University of Utah, because I was reading about this recently. It goes on to mention that hormone
right, 100%, comparing an appendix to genitals, and then given the reason in which you would need a fix would be because something was broken. Well, I would go out on a limb and say, like, I doubt a lot of these individuals' penises weren't working before they got them chopped.
Replacement therapy can make you sterile, and that it's important.
It can.
It's important to preserve your sperm. It says if you're trans feminine. Otherwise, the hormone therapy may make it impossible for you to have biological children. If someone is put on puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones as a child, they will never have the ability to preserve their reproductive functions.
So if you're put on puberty blockers, they are reversible. You can stop being on puberty blockers and you can still maintain a lot of things that you were worried about being taken away. When it comes to Jazz Jennings specifically, she's actually made statements about this because, I was just looking this up. Jazz Jennings says, I don't regret my transition at all. When I was 11, I started male puberty and I was put on hormone blockers. Those blockers saved my life and continued to save the lives of so many youth out there. If I was forced to go through
11 years old. So his argument is that an 11-year-old should be able to consent to puberty blockers in the beginning of what is gender affirming healthcare. I would be curious to see what his argument is for minors consenting to sexual activities.
Through male puberty, it would have been devastating. Even more so, taking estrogen through hormone replacement allowed my body to develop how I wanted. I blossomed into a young woman, eventually got bottom surgery, and now living as a proud woman today. What does that have to do with me? Why would I want to take that away from someone else?
What year did she make that statement?
She made this on March 31st.
She made it recently because that video came out where the mom said she was going to force the dilator.
And then Matt Walsh went hard, and Jazz was like, "Hey, Matt," and then Matt was like, "Sorry, Jazz."
Yeah, we covered that on the Real Time Red Pill. I mean, not Matt Walsh's statement, but the clip that went out of it was viral. I think it's like 30 seconds long. And it's literally Jazz's mom talking about how she would wake Jazz up in the middle of the night with these pliers. I don't know what tool it was, just to ensure they can make sure that hole stays open. Oh, Jazz, I'll be so mad if I can't keep that hole open. And it's just like, dude, that's crazy. Like, was there no one in this lady's life to see this lady and be like, dude, I think what she's doing is criminally or illegal. Why is she touching a kid like that?
There's a lot of questions around the morality of this. The left likes to defer instantly to purity arguments, which I find fascinating, considering the left typically has a low purity rating when it comes to moral foundations.
Yep.
For example, when you said it's really weird talking about someone's genitals, it's a purity argument, which the left typically never makes. That's why I said it's a very weird thing for you to do. Approaching this from an academic perspective, we would make a few arguments about whether or not a person can truly understand they've lost the ability to reproduce if they've never had it in the first place, the psychological and the philosophical implications of stripping away a person's ability to reproduce before they were old enough to even know what that was. So, for example, if you take an adult human, female or male, and remove their genitals by force, they will be very, very upset. Extremely upset. In fact, it's a form of torture in a lot of countries. It's meant to terrify.
Right.
If you took away their ability to feel sexual satisfaction, it's a form of torture. In fact, female circumcision is horrifying to the world. And it actually was huge controversies up in Dearborn, Michigan, because what it would do is it would result in women who are as adults could not feel anything and they were effectively used.
That's awful, dude. Like, that kind of stuff needs to be like dealt with like the death sentence. No other way around it. The arguments for that kind of cruel and unusual, like kind of torture that leave people with, again, irreversible damages that take an entire facet of the human experience away from them. I mean, like, I can't convict you of your judgment, only God can, but I'm sure you know where that's going.
As like objects for their husbands. So in making an academic argument, we would say, Jazz Jennings does not understand, and that's fine if Jazz is happy, that's great. The argument into the greater is Jazz will never have kids. Fact statement. Yeah. I think it's wrong to take away that from someone who doesn't understand what it is.
What if they don't want kids?
They will decide that when they're an adult and have assessed the circumstances.
So is he seriously trying to make the argument that you as a kid would know if you want kids or not? So that's an okay enough consent to making this is why I have a hard time staying head on a swivel into the politics, because you get so frustrated seeing some of these takes from these leftoids who clearly either are doing this in complete bad faith or are 100% just trying to toe the party line and want to be one step in lock with the mob.
But Jazz can't actually feel any of this. Jazz can't feel. This was a study. There's a doctor who came out, did a Zoom video on it, specifically, I think, referring to Jazz, that Jazz will never experience any adult satisfaction or desire. And so the question then becomes, why did Jazz get bottom surgery? My question, why do you think Jazz got bottom surgery?
Oh, I don't have to ask that. She explained why.
What did she say?
She said that she's satisfied with it.
What
That should be
say?
the extent of it.
What did she say?
I don't regret my transition at all. When I was 11, I started male puberty and I was put on hormone blockers. Those blockers saved my life and continue to save the lives of so many youth out there. If I was forced to go through male puberty, it would have been devastating. Even more, taking estrogen through hormone replacement allowed my body to develop how I wanted. I blossomed into a young woman, eventually got bottom surgery, and I'm living as a proud woman today. Yes, I do struggle with mental health and always have, but it's not because I transitioned, and it's unfortunately something many LGBTQ plus people face. Why? Because it has a lot to do with hate and a lack of acceptance that we receive in society.
Yeah, I have mental health illnesses, but trust me, guys, it's definitely not related to the fact that I've been a child reality star since the day I was born, put on a pedestal by my mother, and I dress as a female when I'm a biological male. That has nothing to do with it. Like, come on, dude. Like, who are you talking to?
like I was saying before.
So
So to all of you speaking about our mental health for views and calling our families abusers for supporting our transition, you are the only abusers.
So what was the purpose of the bottom surgery?
It affirmed her
Of
gender.
anyone.
It affirmed her gender.
What does that mean, affirmed gender?
So you have, and all of us have, a gender identity that we want to express in one way or another. And with hers, she affirmed her gender through the process of getting bottom surgery to look more and feel more like a woman.
Why do you think Jazz stopped dilating?
I don't know.
Probably because it hurt.
But if this was an important part of affirmation, you'd think Jazz would maintain it.
That's not for me to decide. That's someone else's own identity.
So-
Again, that's why it's weird to me to try and impose this upon someone else. Like to try and say, like, you're disgusted at the fact that she can't have kids or something like that. It's like, I don't know if she ever wants kids because I don't know who she is. But that's a decision for her to make between her and her doctor. Has nothing to do with me.
Why would any trans child
absurd.
get a bottom surgery?
Again, to affirm their gender
So what?
as part of gender affirming care.
Why
And
would
children don't get bottom surgery, by the way. It's usually over 18.
Well, Jazz was
was a minor.
17.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Right,
Jazz was
and
a
so
minor.
there are exceptions,
And
yes,
that-
but
that-
average
and that,
average age is over
Kim
18.
Petras was
Like
also a
Boston,
teenager.
Boston's Children's Hospital has never done.
He's trying to bring up the average age as if it doesn't happen to a percentage of people who are below that age. Like, again, the whole bad faith arguing that happens is the entire reason why I just am black-pilled about this whole thing. He will not let go of the tribalism of some of these arguments, even to the point that's not on the stream with his abortion argument about Tim just being like, dude, well, how about we tell the mom that we killed the baby and then we hide it and then we can give it away and then somebody can adopt it. And he's like, no, it must be the woman's choice. And it's like, do you not hear what you're saying? You're blatantly just like throwing away all morality just for a woman to have a choice.
Done that on anyone under the age of 18. The average age for bottom surgery is over 18 years old,
So
overwhelmingly.
why would I just don't understand why the it's not penile inversion vaginoplasty. I don't know what it's called because Jazz didn't have a penis. What's the purpose of making the hole, the space? What's the purpose of that?
The operation is because it gives them it affirms their gender through the process of having a similar genitalia to a cis woman.
So what's the purpose of it?
I just explained that.
So the purpose of it is just feeling, just emotion.
No, the purpose of it is part of affirming who they are through a surgery that makes them look and feel more like a version of a woman that they want to be. You don't have to. There's not a template. That's not the only version a woman can be. There's other versions of how a woman can be and look, but that's the version.
Okay, I feel like we're getting really close to them asking, what is a woman?
That she wanted.
So what I'm trying to understand is
Just wait for it.
why create a permanent wound for the purpose of a man to have sex with in order to affirm the identity of someone who can't feel any of that?
Well, first off, I have no idea about the actual sensations that people experience after these kind of surgeries, but that's not my business. And the second thing would be, I don't believe it's a wound.
That's not my business. You are single-handedly being a propagating this, yet don't have the follow-up information regarding end results or conclusatory results about what those life experiences are like after these things happen. That's insane to me.
Wound, I believe, is an operation to have a genital change. That's it. To describe it as a wound is just very crude.
But it's factually a wound, right? I'm trying to avoid the right calls it a mutilation or an abomination. I'm not saying that.
But it's still crude to just call it a wound. After it's healed, I'm sure there's no more wounds or scars or anything.
They have to dilate for the rest of their lives because it is a wound. Like, I'm being academic. I'm not trying to be insulting to anybody. The right calls it mutilation and abomination. The reason they have to use dilators for the rest of their lives is because it is factually a wound.
But you're asking me a question that I can't answer because I'm not this individual. I don't know why someone would want to get that surgery because I'm cis and I don't experience these kind of things. But if someone wants to, but Tim, if someone wants to and it makes them feel.
We're at the point now where this dude's actively like, I'm cis. Like, dude, what a cucked thing to say.
Feel better and improves their quality of life, then why do we have to get in the way of that?
Well, can I
Right.
interject
So
here?
my
Because-
position is for adults, I agree. And I had the argument with Tom Fitton. He said it should be banned outright. I disagree.
But overwhelmingly, when you look at the data, when it happens to children, it improves their psychological distress. It removes and lowers suicidal ideation. It shows in the data that it helps them.
That's not true, man. So the
it is
studies you have
absolutely
here,
true.
the study you have here, the
Absolutely
largest
true.
one. So first of all, as I mentioned, there have been no controlled random.
Absolutely true. It is absolutely, like, come on, bro.
randomized trial, but the largest study you
for
cited
puberty
there,
blockers.
the largest study that you cited there does not say what you think it says. The Stanford University one, it was 27,000 people who were surveyed in 2015, and then there were 2 analyses done of these studies by Jack Turbin, and he lumped data together and did a few manipulative things to get the results he wanted. But there's 2 very important things to mention, which is firstly, this study was based on convenience.
Okay, so YouTube looks naked without this now. Howdy, it's Nate from Channel Makers here. I spend a lot of time building YouTube channels, and chances are
convenience sampling. So they were speaking with people who were sent to them by LGBTQ advocacy groups.
Apologize to everybody who is watching. I think I'm having internet issues, which is always perfect. That always happens right at the perfect time when I need it to, which is when I'm streaming. So I'll give it a second and hopefully we can keep going.
Groups that they reached out to. So you're already not getting an unbiased population sample there. And then they were determining whether that person received puberty blockers and other such treatments or hadn't, but they didn't go over the reasons. In fact, the people who hadn't received puberty blockers or those kinds of treatments didn't receive them because they weren't allowed to. And one of the requirements for being able to receive that kind of treatment is some level of psychological stability, which means the people who weren't on puberty blockers in that study were more likely to be psychologically unstable, which we would expect to produce a higher suicide rate, but that wasn't controlled for. On top of that, the data actually shows that the men who are on estrogen were more likely to become suicidal. But what he ended up doing, that's true, what he ended up doing was lumping them together. So he said people on cross-sex hormones are less likely to commit suicide because according to the sample he had of women, that was true enough to overcompensate for the increased likelihood of suicidality in the men. And he just threw them all together as if a man taking estrogen is the same thing as a woman taking testosterone, and we could expect the same medical outcomes. And I'm saying that's bullshit.
So to respond to you, I do have a number of peer-reviewed studies related to this.
And if they're as good as that one, I'm telling you, they're trash.
Mental health outcomes in transgender and non-binary youth receiving gender-affirming care. February 25th, 2022. This one shows kids who received puberty blockers and hormone therapy had 60% lower odds of moderate or severe depression, 73% lower odds of suicidality. Gender identity 5 years after social transition. This one is in the American Academy of Pediatrics, peer-reviewed, July 13th, 2022. Between 317 youth, they found 94% binary transgender stayed the same. Only 2.5% reverting as cisgender, 3.5% as non-binary trans. A UK 2019 study of 3,398 people who had gender-affirming care found that only 0.47% regretted it. Another one, the impacts of strong parental support for trans youth, found that parents who support trans youth, this was 433 participants, double-blind study, 93% reduction in reported suicides.
So why do
hold on, and I think we can all have the good faith that you did as much work fact-checking those studies as you did the one I just tore apart, but I didn't have time to go into every single bit of statistical information you would bring here.
This is the problem.
That's beautiful stuff right there. Seamus knows what he's talking about. He knows the argument being presented to him. He knows his own argument, and he knows the studies in which are going to be presented in these arguments, and understanding like the methodology of how it was taken out, how many participants, the back-ended information, the front-ended information. That is how you show you know what you're talking about. It's beautiful stuff.
With like you mentioned, going the studies back and forth or whatever. So that's why I'm fine with. I'm not here to change your morals, right?
Oh, I know.
And that's fine. So my question would just be, why do you think it is that in Europe they've abandoned these practices?
A lot of it was political. If you look at the history of it, especially when it came to puberty blockers and how that was handled, it was in large part a political decision that both medical groups, advocates, as well as pro-LGBTQ organizations.
Thank you, Adrian. Take care. I appreciate you.
Outwardly protested, and especially like I know you're going to bring up Finland. I believe was one of the countries that did it. Sweden as well. And,
the UK.
Yeah, and in a number of cases,
Denmark,
this is something in which experts in the fields of endocrinology, pediatrics, they were very opposed to it. It was politicians who were pushing for this, and so this was a political decision. This is why I don't like when politics get directly involved in medical decisions, because I mean, like you were saying, if you want to look up the actual organizations that support this. It's every major medical association in the United States, everyone without fail.
But they're for profit. A lot of times, if you don't get politically involved in the medical industry, they'll.
Okay, before Ian goes on a tangent and takes away from the conversation, I can't imagine after going through everything we went through with COVID, all of the lockdowns, all of the just blatant deflections, misinformation, all of that, but brought to you by Pfizer. And then you're going to act as if these same pharmaceutical giants are in any way or meaning their virtue signal has is irrelevant. Absolutely irrelevant. This guy is so whitewashed and so blue-pilled. He is a carbon copy cookie cutout of what the American government wants you to act like.
Experiment on humans for money.
And also,
some of them are,
fair,
some of them are not. If I listed them to you right now, because I have the list, some of these are not for-profit institutions just looking to make a fucking buck. Some of these are just genuinely concerned about child health care.
And some of them have various, ideological biases. This isn't always about money all the time. But if you're going to reject what Tim is saying about medical institutions no longer performing these operations in Nordic Europe because you're claiming those institutions have become political, I don't know how you could give any credibility to the American ones.
So it's not the medical...
Do you think the American model of practicing medicine is better than the model in Nordic Europe?
Let me answer your question.
Okay.
It's not the organizations themselves that have done it distinctly. It was politicians and political organizations as well as think tanks that were pushing for it. And it was a lot of experts in the field that directly wanted it not to happen, that were fighting against it.
But then why is it the case that the nation that started doing this earlier than any of the others was the Netherlands? They started around 1990 administering puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones for children who purported to be struggling with feelings of dysphoria. And so they have some of the longest term data available on this. And what they found is that transitioning has no effect on suicidality.
That's part of the studies that I'm interested in, is the suicide stuff. Like in 2022, they measured a bunch of people that transitioned. They were suicidal. They transitioned. Now they're not. But it's like, hey, that was 8 months ago. Like, how are you going to feel in 4 years from now? So it's hard to say like now they're no longer suicidal just because they're like, yeah, I'm not suicidal now. But like we need long-term studies.
We do need to go to super chats because we're...
Yep, they're getting ready to go to super chats. I was going to end it there because that argument's going to get boggled down by what the comments were on the super chats. I guess this is a broad not broad. This right here is just an example of what it is like when you debate a leftist who comes forward to the debate, who is 100% acting like they're going to debate things objectively or come from a place of good faith. And when debating even a centrist, someone who is on both sides of the political aisle, someone like Tim, who has a lot of socially progressive things he likes, as well as he's got some conservative takes as well, specifically with things like gun rights and stuff like that. You see when it gets put to a limelight, it gets exposed, and the arguments that he has to back it down are just all tribally based, having no real morals behind any of the stances he has. Everything he said was purely just, this is my belief system. My belief system is the mob, and you're saying things that don't fit with that, so you must be wrong. And then the whole thing with like not knowing what was behind those studies, and then only bring the meta-analysis data of said studies, not understanding why those are dismissed in the same light as the way that the ivermectin's ones were, that was in this in TIMCAST stream, not this one. And so that was just another sad live reaction of me losing faith in humanity. And I appreciate you all for coming. I'm going to end it there. It's just sad stuff. I was watching this live when I was coming home from work, and I was like, man, this is just a lot of good material. And I just want to go ahead and react to the end part of this too. So I appreciate you if you joined. I did drop a video a couple of hours ago. Like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Leave hate comments if you don't. Either way, don't really care. I appreciate the engagement. And